It's the Behind the Bitch check-in. It's the Behind the Bitch check-in. It's the Behind the Bitch check-in. You don't know what's going on if I don't check in. So it's the Behind the Bitch check-in. Hey, it's the Behind the Bitch check-in. It's the first day of September. The Rick Roberts episode is out, episode 34. A great episode. I highly suggest you download and listen. Rick Roberts has a podcast called School of Laughs Podcast, which has been out since 2014. A lot of the stuff I do on my podcast, I kind of model after his. So give it a listen. Rick Roberts has a great podcast. He also has a show or a comedy special on Dry Bar. You just download the Dry Bar comedy app and look up Rick Roberts, and the title of it is Put Down the Sweet Tea. So yeah, I really enjoyed that episode. Rick Roberts, episode 34. Give that a listen for sure. And just go ahead and subscribe to the podcast while you're there and listen to all the episodes because they're all good. I had a comedy contest last night. A lot of people watched. And something was wrong with my sound, so I was muted for about 95% of the time. And it was a pretty disappointing evening for me. However, the comedy contest still went on. The voting went off without a hitch. We did lose one comic due to computer problems. My mic continued to cause echo and distortion and just terrible, terrible things. So I stayed muted. I did have the help of Michael Banks, who hosted for me. And oh, golly, thank goodness I asked him to host for me, because if I didn't have him, then I would have had to scrap the whole show. So he saved the day. Thank you, Michael Banks. And still had great performances. I looked back at them this morning, and we've actually got a couple winners. So the comics voted on each other in 3 criteria, and the votes came in, and I tabulated them because I can do that even though my sound wasn't so good. And Funky Sam Adita and Justin Mattson go on to the finals on October 5th. And October 5th, I'm going to have some real comics judging on the same criteria, and I'm going to have the 2 winners from yesterday's round 1, who is Funky Sam Medina and Justin Mattson, 2 winners from the September 14th round, and 2 winners from the September 21st round. And my first round was my worst round as far as sound goes, but it's going to get better because I think I found out what was wrong with my sound. Yay. But it was very stressful last night. Very stressful. Now today, I interviewed Scott Hardiman for the podcast. Now Scott is not a comic. He's not a comedian. He's not in the comedy business. He is a confidence coach from the United Kingdom, and he will actually do remote coaching for you via Zoom. And all you got to do is go to ScottHardimanCoaching.com and check it out. It was a really good episode. It's the first time I've had somebody who's not in the comedy business at all on the podcast, but we started talking about confidence, self-doubt, things that can, kind of mess up your comedy career, and things that can make it go better. So I kind of drilled him and threw a lot of hard questions at him, but he did a really good job at it. And This is kind of a cheat, but I went ahead and stayed live the whole time because we had quite a few people watching. So if you want to watch it or listen to it before it comes out, you can check it out on YouTube or the Behind the Bits Facebook page, and it's all there. So that's a cheat. It will also be on the regular podcast as a download, but I had such an engaging conversation, I let it go live since people were watching. Thursday. We've got the BTB Internet Talk Show, which is one of my favorite parts of the week and one of my favorite things. We have Micah Ream, we've got Robert Peppers, and we've got Dino Thorogood. I'm excited about this group. I'm going to keep it to three for a little while because I feel like three gives them more chance to talk and we interact a little bit better. So I'm going to keep it at three. So if you want to take bets on if Robert Pepper shows up on time, now's the time to do it because he's been scheduled twice and has showed up 5 minutes before the end of the show both times. So, Robert, if you're listening, it's 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I don't know what time you're on, but it's 8 p.m. Micah is part of Micah and Dino are both part of the Hot Breath Writing Group, run by Joel Byers, which I mentioned quite a bit, and they are both funny people. And Robert, I'm sure, is funny and will be on time this time. If you want to do bets on that, call your bookie. But yeah, it's going to be a great show. I'm excited about it. Dean Martin's going to show up as usual. And if you look over my shoulder, you will see a nicely done pencil drawing of Dean Martin. The story behind that is that was drawn by Jeff Bodart, who is going to be interviewed by myself, tomorrow. And we'll talk about the picture. We'll talk about his comedy. He's been doing comedy for a long time. He's a good working comic, and that's who I like to talk to on the podcast. So we'll talk about Dino, and I may become Dino. Hey, it's me, Dean Martin. How you doing? Or I might not. Podcast. So there is some confusion. So right now I'm doing three different things. I'm doing the podcast, Behind the Bits podcast. That's the main thing. That's what I'm all about. The Behind the Bits podcast. I talk serious about stand-up comedy, and I hope you listen because that's what I am doing that for. I do the Thursday night BTB Internet Talk Show, which is just fun. I started it. I did it as a goof, and then I started it back up in a couple weeks after that, and I just like doing it. I like meeting new people, having fun, bringing out old Dean Martin, and just having a good time. So that is not a podcast. Some people call that a podcast. That is just me doing video stuff. A podcast would, in my definition of a podcast, it would be available audio only. So what I do on Thursday is available live on Facebook and live on YouTube on Behind the Bits channels. So I don't ever download the audio and put it up as a podcast, so it's not a podcast. It's a video thing. So that's the second thing I do. First thing is Behind the Bits podcast. Second thing is the BTB Internet Talk Show. And the third thing is a temporary thing, but still important, and that is the BTB Virtual Comedy Contest. And that is occurring again on September 14th, and then again on September 21st for preliminary rounds, where we will have 7 comics perform. They will give feedback to each other, grade each other, and then I will pick two winners based on the scoring. And the winners of all three, which will be six of them, there's two winners, two top scores, will go on to the October 5th championship and win some money, $100, $50, $25. And then those three I will have on for an actual podcast interview, and maybe we'll do a special BTB Internet talk show with those three on and just have a good time. So that's what I do. That's the three things I'm doing right now. So the Behind the Bits podcast is my baby, and that's what I want everybody to listen to and subscribe to and download. And if you want to hit my Patreon page, that's great. You can get it through my website, thebtbpc.com. But I do check out other podcasts, and comics, for some reason, so many of them like Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know why. It's not my thing. I don't care for it. I'm not going to listen to this podcast, but it's put out by a friend of mine, Grant Melky, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about it because a lot of comics like Dungeons and Dragons. So it is called The Homebrew, a D&D podcast, and that's their podcast logo, which doesn't tell you much. So I'm going to put a link to their Facebook page in the comments here, so you can go check it out. So if you're into comedy, there's a good chance you're into Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, whatever you want to call it. Not me. I listened to about 45 seconds of the podcast and I was done, but you guys are into it. And I know if Grant does it, he does it well. So it's going to be a very good live D&D podcast. So if you like Dungeons and Dragons, give it a listen. I think you'll like it. I don't like Star Wars either, so sorry. I don't have much else to talk about. I'm not going to talk about the Dream Guest playoffs because I haven't done anything. I was angry after the sound issues last night, and I didn't do anything, and I worked today. So, yeah, congrats to Funky Sam Medina and Justin Matson for going on. They are the two winners of preliminary round one. And I talked to Scott Hardiman today, and that entire interview is available on the Behind the Bits Facebook page and the Behind the Bits YouTube channel when it propagates and is ready to go. So you don't have to wait for that one because we were having a good conversation. I kept it going. Today on Behind the Bits, which is the podcast that you download through apps, whatever app you want to use, type in Behind the Bits, is Rick Roberts. He is from Nashville, lives in Nashville right now, rode his bicycle 60 miles last week in a single day. He's shooting for 70 next week and is a very good comedian. Oh, good. Some Nobodies love D&D. So some Nobodies podcast, plural, podcasts, are some that I'm checking out. Now, I'm getting into the other ones, but Silicon Angels was my first baby. That is the serial fiction podcast. They've got, I think they said they've got 14 or 18 people, improv actors doing this with them. So what it is Zach and Dylan write it's Zach Wiseman and Dylan Terry. They write the scripts for this, and then they make it kind of loose so the improv actors can do what they want to do, which makes it even better because when you get more brains around something, it gets better. So they wrote this premise, and I'll just tell you what it has. It's got sex robots. It's got technical support of sex robots, and it's got murder. So three of the absolute best things you can put in a podcast. And I'm already done with season one. I binge listened to that. I had it done in 3 days, and it was fantastic. So I highly recommend that podcast. I am currently listening to some of their other podcasts. First, I am listening to the podcast, which is a podcast that talks about podcasts. What they do is they take 7 podcasts every episode, and these are shorter episodes. They're only like 20 minutes or so. They take 7 episodes every podcast, and they pretty much give a synopsis and they give a thumbs up, thumbs down, but go in a little bit more detail on why they like it or why they don't like it. They find some really weird ones. There's one where I think it's called "Waiting on Somebody," and it goes anywhere from 10 minutes to I think 4 or 5 hours. Somebody talking while they're waiting on their friend. So I mean, they they find all the weird ones. I find some weird ones, but they do a really good job in finding the weird ones. So yeah, make sure you check out if I was to hit the Some Nobodies catalog, first of all, go to somenobodies.com and check out their website, and you can see all the podcasts they do. But they are Silicon Angels was my first one, and I really liked it. Uh, Obviously, since I binge listened in 3 days, and then they're starting one concerning Lovecraft Country, which is an HBO show that either started or is going to start. I'm 56 years old. I can't keep up with all this shit, so just cut me a break. But it's something that's on HBO. I will probably watch it in 5 or 6 years after it's already been done for a long time. But yeah, that's they're starting that. I mean, they do like a live thing where they on Sundays, and I can't remember the name of it, but they Dylan and Zach get together and they spitball ideas for a script for a streaming service, and they decide which one they're going to do. Then they flesh it out a little bit, and they come back the next week and talk about it again. And it's just they're very creative, much more creative than I could ever handle. But yeah, that's really what's going on this week. Today is Tuesday, and I'm really trying to stop saying and I'm trying to stop stammering as much. So that makes me talk a little bit slower because my brain goes much faster than my mouth. So I am trying to enunciate and talk better, stop saying stop saying the same thing 3 times before I get it out. So I'm working on all that, and hopefully that comes out in the podcast because every time I hear an in the podcast, I go nuts. So that's it. So quick recap before I decide what I'm going to cook for dinner. Rick Roberts is out on the Behind the Bits podcast on all the apps right now, except for maybe the Apple podcast because they're a day behind. Thursday, we've got Micah Ream, Robert Peppers, and Dino Thorogood on the BTB Internet Talk Show. It's going to be a good time. Dean's going to show up. We have Funky Sam Medina and Justin Matson have gone on to the final round of the BTB Virtual Comedy Contest. Congratulations to them. They both had great sets. Everybody had a great set last night. I'm glad I wasn't judging. And, oh yeah, Scott Hardiman. I talked to him live today, and I went ahead and just kept the whole recording going, so you can find it on YouTube probably tomorrow. And it's on the Facebook page now if you want to pre-listen. But then download the podcast episode too on your mobile device so that I can get more downloads. And that's really all I got going on. Thank you. Be kind to each other. And if you have something really bad happen to you, like the sound issues that I had today, listen to this Scott Hardiman episode and understand that that's just a one-time thing. You can fix it and go on, and everything's cool. So goodbye, and Dean says goodbye too. Have a great night.